You're listening to The Grind. Well-caffeinated conversations with disc golfers who are passionate about improving their games and helping others to do the same. Welcome to episode 21 of The Grind, a disc golf podcast. I'm Josiah, and with me, my good buddy David, and Aaron Gossage. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate you guys letting me come here and speak on your podcast.
Yeah, stoked to have you on, man.
Yeah, we're super stoked. When you went on tour, I didn't realize that you were actually practicing in Arizona and had gone out there early. And so I was like, oh, we should get Aaron on before the season. And then I messaged you, and David was like, pretty sure he moved to Arizona so you could get some warm weather.
Yeah, I think Steven had told me you moved to Arizona. And so I was like, oh, I'm pretty sure you moved.
So we're glad that you stopped through town. We've got a fun episode lined up this week. Aaron's going to talk to us about getting that forehand distance. We are going to talk about what separates AMs and lower level open players from top pros. And we are going to review the Discraft Raptor. But first, got to ask, and we'll start with you, David. What are you sipping on, and how was your disc golf week?
See, today we're sipping on another one from that Wasatch Roasting Company from our trip to Ogden. It's from that same Serenia coffee farm in Thailand. This one's actually a red honey process. And I told Josiah before the show, I actually had to look this up because I'm familiar with honey process, and I've seen different colors of honey process. There's red, black, gold, white. Yeah, there's quite a few. And I was curious what the difference was because I actually didn't know. And the red honey process is actually, so we talked before on the podcast with the natural coffee, the fruit, the cherry is being dried with the coffee bean when the bean is being dried. With the honey process, you pit from the cherry and you leave the residue on the bean and you dry it with the residue. The red honey process specifically has a bit more of that residue left on the bean, and that's why it's called a red honey as opposed to a white or yellow honey. It would be a little bit less of that residue. And so it's going to leave typically a bit more of a sweeter, fruity taste to it, theoretically. I think the tasting notes that they have written on here are brown sugar, cucumber, and guava. I get kind of the brown sugar. I mean, cucumber I feel like is a hard one to pick up in coffee. And guava, I could see something going on there, but really for me, it's a good cup, clean. It has a sweet taste to it, but nothing super pronounced jumping out at me just yet.
Yeah, so this one's fermented like the other ones we had from.
Oh, this one's not fermented.
Oh, it's
this
not
is the
fermented.
one in that set that was not fermented.
Okay, because I was about to say it doesn't have quite that flavor to it. Yeah. That makes sense. So we had non-fermented, we had fermented with the cherry on.
Yep.
And then we had fermented washed.
Yep. We're probably just confusing the heck out of Aaron right now. This seems like way too much. This is a cup of coffee, man.
It is a cup of coffee. Aaron, you said you're not too much of a coffee guy. How do you like your coffee normally?
I just like, it doesn't really matter. Cream is usually what I go for, but I drink it black. I just have it for the caffeine, to be honest.
Well, that's probably because you're not drinking great coffee. And once you go down the rabbit hole, you'll be talking about different flavors. I mean, different colors of honey, apparently, which isn't really honey.
Don't go down too far. It's a deep pit.
The truth is that is pretty different than what you would typically drink in terms of it's not quite as bitter. It doesn't have quite as strong of like chocolatey notes. The mouthfeel may be a little different, but in the end, it's all coffee. And you like disc golf, you can get deep into things that other people are like, what are these people talking about?
Yeah, to me, it just tasted like a good cup of coffee.
That's what I love. When we had Wilking on, we were asking how he chooses his coffee, and I love what he said. He's like, you know what, man? I just go into the grocery store, and whichever one looks like the coolest bag, that's the one I grab.
It's funny, when we had him on the show again recently, I tried to send my son Isaac to the store to pick a really fun colored bag so that we could enjoy it on the podcast and kind of give Wilking a hard time. And it was unsuccessful because everyone he picked was one I was like, there's no way I'm drinking that. It's like not anywhere close to something I'd want. So we gave up and just had, I think we had coffee ice cream one episode and lattes from Kiln the other episode. But
yeah.
Anyway, how was your disc golf week, David?
Disc golf week, been kind of a short week because, let's see, I got back on Thursday. We're recording early this week on Wednesday. I got to play on, we played on Friday?
Yeah, David's just returning from a trip to Europe, so
then
getting his disc golf legs back under him.
So we got a tournament in Delta this coming weekend for the NADGT series, and so I drove down on Monday to get a round in down there, and I, for the most part, I threw a bunch of shots on all the holes that I really wanted to work on. I told Josiah I shot -6. To be honest with you, I don't know if that's that's actually true, because I threw so many shots I didn't remember half the time which one I threw first.
What you probably actually shot was like -10.
Yeah, exactly. I'm pretty sure that's what it was. But it was a really fun round. I just went down with my wife because I didn't want to bug all my buddies with throwing a ton of drives on each hole. But had a really good time, and I felt like I told Josiah I put the Berg in my bag just because there's that 180-foot hole at Delta that's just that 6-foot tunnel to the basket. And man, the Berg is so perfect for that shot with a forehand. It just goes straight to the basket every time. And so super pumped. I'm getting really pumped for the tournament and feel like I'm in a really good place. Expected my putting to be terrible coming back for being gone for almost 2 weeks. But my putting actually feels maybe a little bit better than when I was. I think just the mental rest has been good for my game.
It's funny because that first round we played on Sunday last week when you got back, my putting had been feeling incredible, and then I missed all my putts, and you had been gone, and you were making all your step putts, and I was like,
you feel the
gosh,
pressure.
David, why are you back? Just go back to Europe.
I'm just putting the pressure on.
Yeah, I had a good week too. I recorded with Wilking on Monday, and it's Wednesday now, so I got 2 Watson 6 or 5:30 a.m. rounds in before work, and my game feels a little off, but I'm sure I'll pull it together before Delta. I feel like sometimes you just have to try to forget the bad shots and just focus on the times you made a good shot here and there. So I'm excited about the tournament. I hopefully will continue the momentum from the last tournament and play well. But we have buddies coming, and last tournament it was just me, so I think it'll be fun. Aaron, how was your disc golf week?
Oh, it was pretty good.
Just a little different competitive level and context there.
Yeah, a little different vibe there for sure. Portland Open is what I competed in last weekend, and a 4-day, just massive tournament, tons of throws, long courses. But I played 2 rounds of just solid around my rating kind of golf at Blue Lake. Not really my style, but I was putting really well. Then we got over to the ball golf course and started playing quite a bit better. Managed to get up to 3rd card, and then had a little bit of a rough finish. The last 4 or 5 holes, the last round, were a little rough. Had a few bogeys there, but overall took 12th place. Happy with that, and mainly it's just my putting carrying me through all weekend.
It seemed like the weather changed in that last round, the last few holes. Is that true, or is that just what I saw in coverage?
Yeah, that last day is like the previous days. It was kind of solid. First day was kind of nice. Second day was just rainy. Third day was a little bit rainy, a little bit nice, and the last day just was going all over the place. It'd be windy, then it'd be calm, then it'd be sunny, then it'd be raining, and
that Pacific Northwest weather, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. So it was hard to read, and then coming down the stretch, I had a few holes where we got some weird winds on holes where I was like, oh, this isn't the hole I want the wind on. But you just lost a little bit of focus there at the end. I think if I had just really put my nose to the grindstone there, focused all the way to the end, I could have finished a little better.
What did you think about those courses, especially, I guess, Blue Lake? Had you played that one before?
No, I hadn't played either of those courses. Last year I did play the Portland Open, but it was on the other half of the Glendoveer golf course.
Right,
so
right. That's a very
course.
different layout for sure.
Yeah, I like this layout quite a bit. It definitely had a theme of low ceiling shots. There were a lot of rollers where that was pretty much the only option to get through the low ceiling. Blue Lake was also an interesting theme because it was a very short, easy course, lots of birdies, but lots of out of bounds. So if I were to play the course again, I would really keep that in mind and try to play all my shots safe. Like I said, I was putting really well, and it's not super common for me. So usually while I'm trying to park baskets so I don't have to putt as much, that weekend it would have been better to put myself at 40 feet safe and take all those putts because I was feeling very confident in them.
I'm curious where you learned throwing rollers at, because I know the courses in the Valley, we don't really have a rolling course. Maybe you were intentional with going to get that shot.
I played a lot of ball golf courses.
Okay.
So one of the things in Colorado is we have all these like mountain courses where you can't throw any rollers, but then every now and then you'll get on a ball golf course and you just throw a bunch of rollers, and that's where you get good at it, in my opinion. And then on tour, we play a lot of courses that are along like that where you need to throw rollers. And at the end of the day, it's just throwing an Anheuser really hard, and it just goes on the ground.
Okay.
So you get used to the angles, practice it a few times, and you get used to what you need to do. It's like any other shot. Just pick your line, pick your angle, pick your speed.
Yeah, I feel like I occasionally will try a roller at Watson just for fun, and there's so many rocks and sticks in the way that you really have no idea whether you threw a good roller or not. They always turn out poorly, but I have the imagination like, oh, if that rock wasn't in the way, it would have been great. It's fun to see those short rollers, but they're very specific shot. Like a roller, a backhand roller that you're not, like Simon was throwing a lot of them, you're not really going for distance. You're really going for to get that, like long right turning shot or something like that. It's pretty interesting. Or the low ceiling as well. It's fun. It takes a certain level of control with that angle to make sure it doesn't roll 200 feet too far or something like that.
Yeah, Simon's really good at that. I noticed especially hole 1 at Blue Lake is a very controlled roller where you got to throw something flippy on a lot of cut just to not keep it from going too far. The other player I'd say that's really good at that is Nico. A lot of times when you have like a big forehand hole, he'll throw like a quick turning roller instead. And he's one of the few players I know that will pick that over throwing a big forehand or turnover.
Yeah, it's fun to see. It's fun with disc golf. There's so many different styles. So one thing I don't think I knew about you, Aaron, until watching you on tour was how much power you have with the forehand. I feel like I knew you had distance, and I knew you had a lot of backhand distance, and I had a powerful forehand, but watching you throw with like Anthony Barella at Memorial, I was like, oh, that's a serious forehand. And I wanted to talk to you maybe a little bit about how you developed that forehand power, and what do you think are some of those keys to getting that sort of controlled but explosive forehand play. A lot of us as AMs are like trying to get it out to 250 on the forehand, but I feel like a lot of things are probably applicable across the board, even if you're throwing 500 plus on your forehand, you think?
I think I could probably push something out to 500, but I'm throwing between 420 to 450 on like a somewhat consistent shot.
Yeah, that's cool. So what do you think, how did you develop that?
So when I started playing the game, I probably played for like 6 years, forehand only. That was back when I was a kid. I was like 5, 6 years old, something like that, up until I was 10 or 11. Had no backhand whatsoever. So just starting out, I had a lot of confidence in throwing forehands. Whenever I need to hit a gap, that's kind of my go-to shot. And then I switched over to be more of a backhand dominant player when I started to get more distance with it. And then when I started touring, I would say I was much more confident in my backhand than my forehand. And I just put a lot of work into throwing forehands, and it got to the point where it was super solid for me. And that's the number one thing that improved my first year on tour. And I definitely went from probably like 380 consistent distance up to, that like 420, 430, just from some practice. And then the other thing I would say is my backhand is more well suited for elevation. I throw it hard. I put a lot of snap on it. And my forehand, I throw a lot smoother, which is more suited for lower elevation. Glides a little bit more. I throw a little flippier disc, get a pop-up, and it kind of glides a little bit more. So I've kind of had a little bit of transition there at the lower elevation.
That's interesting because that's kind of the opposite of what I imagine the typical player's forehand-backhand relationship is, where they're getting a lot of torque on their forehand, have a hard time spinning it, the backhand, maybe a little bit more spin, but hard to get it, at elevation, for example, to get that turn, or if you're trying to get a lot of distance with the high-speed disc. So that's super interesting. I think that touch forehand is a fun shot to watch people throw because it is less common than the really overstable disc thrown, super hard or on an ante line.
Yeah, it's interesting that you said that you're throwing a little bit more of an understable disc with your forehand, because I started off, I told you before the show that the one time that I ran into Aaron on the course, I just got done shanking a shot onto an island. And I was throwing an Archon forehand at the time.
Which is like a pretty neutral high speed end of a disc.
Yeah. And after a while, after turning that over so much, I switched to throwing, I'm a forehand dominant for the most part player as well. I switched over to throwing the Wraith, and the Wraith has been so much more consistent for me because I definitely add a little torque on my wrist just to get that distance. And I'm getting probably around the 380 mark is around where I'm getting. And I've been kind of, every once in a while I'll get lucky and get 400. Maybe there's the perfect tailwind or something. that's kind of where I've been at for the past like year and a half or so, and I haven't really been able to. I feel like I haven't seen much improvement since. So it's interesting for me to hear you talking about using a more understable disc to get that distance.
Yeah, I think there's kind of two different ways of throwing forehands, and they both work. I'm not saying one's better than the other, but a lot of players like Anthony Barella, like Austin Hannum, throw very similar to I think what you're talking about, where when they're throwing it, they're kind of snapping their wrist over. Mm-hmm. It creates a ton of torque. You get some good speed on the disc, and you need a very stable disc to like fight out of that turn that you put on it. And I used to throw like that quite a bit too, and I could put a lot of speed and snap on the disc with it. But then the other kind of way you throw is more like a Jeremy Colling kind of style. It's kind of what I'm throwing as well, is I really try hard to keep my palm up when I'm throwing. And that's like all the way through my entire follow through. Like I never roll the wrist over at all. And for me, it creates a much more controllable shot. I know exactly the line it's going to be released at, and I know exactly the snap it's going to be released at. Because every now and then you roll it over, you'll do like 110%. And you'll just like rip that disc, and you'll see it like wobble a little bit because you just threw it harder than you're used to. And I think that's one of the things that's really helped me with my consistency in my forehand. And then that's why I'm throwing flippier discs. It's because I'm not quite putting that same amount of torque on it. I'm putting a lot of glide, a lot of spin, and getting a very smooth release. That way I can throw a little flippier disc. I can get it to pop up flat, get a full like triple turn out of it. And I'm getting similar distance to someone like Anthony Barella, who's just hammering on these turnover lines. Just because I'm throwing a little flippier disc, getting a little bit more of a distance line out of it, even though I'm not throwing quite as hard as he is.
For sure. That's interesting. I've heard the kind of the debate back and forth between those two different styles. And I love how you presented it. They're just two different styles of how you approach the game. Are there times where you feel like you do use a bit more of an overstable disc to, is there shots that you do that, or do you try to create more of a consistent, repeatable motion so you're not, I guess if you simplified it and you had it, we're doing the same thing over and over again, you wouldn't make, I don't know.
Yeah, I definitely do throw more overstable discs, especially this past year in this crazy amount of wind we've been having. There's some shots where I'm just throwing as hard as I can with my most overstable disc, just trying to get some distance and not turn the disc over. I would say that I try, no matter what I'm doing, to never roll my wrist. So even when I'm throwing an Anheuser shot, I'm trying to keep my palm up and just keep the disc on that same line throughout my entire motion, and then finish, even though I'm finishing down a little bit, my palm's still going to be up and never have that wrist roll.
One of the things that the wrist roll seems to do for me, and I think for others probably, is get the disc to be a little bit nose down. I don't know if that's actually true, but that's when I feel the wrist roll, I usually end up with a lower shot, where if I try to have that smooth release, sometimes on the forehand, I'll end up with kind of having a little bit of a swoop, and then you end up with this big hyzer when you were trying to throw straight. Do you have any tips or anything you do, or has that ever been a struggle for you with that smoother release, to make sure you get the disc not rising the whole flight?
Yeah, the swoop is a very common thing, and I think it deters a lot of people from throwing that palm up kind of style. The one thing that I really focus on to get rid of that kind of swoop in my motion is the backswing and the follow through. I try to find exactly the angle that I want the disc to start on and the angle I want the disc to finish on. So if I'm throwing flat, I'd like to start it exactly where the disc is going to be released, just like back in my motion, and I like to follow through exactly at the same line that it was released, but like farther in the line. And if I can keep that motion in the backswing where it's released and the follow through, it never has that chance to veer off the path to drop my like elbow down so that it pops the disc up, kind of nose up.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And you can see, I think, or I can see, why it's so hard for people to watch three pros talk about forehand. I mean, I was watching From Scratch to Scratch, which is like a DGN off-season episode where Paul Ulibarri was teaching this new disc golfer how to score par on a hole or on a course. I thought of Scratch as 1,000 rated, so when the idea of them in like 3 months taking somebody from fresh to 1,000 rated, I was like, if he can do that, I'm moving to North Carolina, because that would be incredible. But I mean, still, par on a difficult or average course is not easy for beginners. Anyway, that aside, you literally had Paul Macbeth and Brian Earhart saying the opposite thing in the forehand instruction, or maybe it was Colling and Macbeth. Opposite thing, where Paul was like, hey, just throw something a little bit more overstable. and make sure you follow through down so you can get that line consistently anhyzer and consistently nose down. And so it's just, I think sometimes when you're trying to like piece together how to be a good disc golfer, sometimes you have to realize, and I think it's hard to do, that there's two distinct styles or multiple distinct styles to probably any throw or putt, etc. And there's principles that apply, but I don't know, it's helpful for you to say, here's the two styles. Because I think for me, sometimes I'm like, how can I square, hey, make sure you follow through palm up, with make sure you follow through down like an athlete. That's kind of a very different perspective or idea.
Yeah, I think that what Paul's talking about is a really good way of learning a forehand for a beginner player. It feels a lot more like throwing a baseball. It feels like a much more natural motion. I think the way I'm throwing forehands is more like a tennis player. You'll see that I feel like it correlates with that motion a little bit more, because I like to throw like low to high a little bit more versus a lot of more people like throw that like high to low baseball kind of throw. But going back to what you said, it's just a different way of doing it. Hole 5 at Hornets Nest last year, I was playing with Zach Johnson, and I was like, oh, this is totally a forehand hole. And Zach's, going to throw that. He stepped up and he threw his little flex forehand, parked the basket, and I threw my little hyzer flip, hit a different gap, parked the basket, and both of us were like, we never even considered throwing that other shot,
right?
Even though they're both forehands.
Yeah, that's fun. Once again, disc golf is just such a cool sport.
Dude, one of my favorite forehand shots, I can't remember which hole it was in Arizona, but I just remember I was watching it, I think it was live, but the disc golf guy was like, getting it up to this spot is where you want with your ideal power forehand. And then I think you pumped it like 30 to 50 feet past that ideal spot. And he just starts, oh my gosh, you guys have no idea how much of a pump that was. And so that was for me the first time that I was like, holy crap. Aaron has an incredible forehand.
Yeah, that day I had some like nerves going, and I was just feeling the forehand. Started out the round throwing a few flex forehands into the wind, and stepped up to a few of those holes, and I was like, wow, that's the farthest forehand I've ever thrown on this hole. That's quite a bit farther than I was expecting.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's fun. I just really appreciate you being so relatable with that. That's fun. I think a lot of us are like, oh, the forehand feels good today. I guess I'm going to force a forehand on a few holes I'd be throwing a backhand on, or vice versa. A lot of times vice versa for me, so it's fun. I wanted to talk to you as well. David and I talked about this, but you're from the Valley. You played a lot locally, and now with really terrible disc golfers. We would, and then like average, and now you're playing at the highest level. And you've stepped through some gates of, hey, you're a good local player. Hey, you're a good regional player. Hey, you're performing at the top level. And I wanted to know, from your perspective, what's one thing you could highlight that really separates those AMs and lower level open players from taking the next step or from leveling up? What's one of those things that hinders them?
Yeah, there's a lot of things going on there for sure. I think that one of the ways I was able to get from the decent amateur player up to like professional level player was mainly my distance. I've always thrown far. It's been one of the best parts of my game. And even when I was like a 980 player, I was throwing 1020 drives with 900 level putts. So it was that kind of thing where pieces of my game improved at different levels. And there's a point, where I'm a 980 player, I could win, just like all the other 980 players. We could all win the tournament, or we could lose by a lot. Just was a matter of how we played that time. And for me, it was definitely just getting my drives. Like I was throwing far, I was throwing accurate. That's what got me to that like professional level. And then really like smoothing out my game, getting everything pretty consistent across the board. Had a good forehand, good backhand, all those pieces coming together. That's when I started playing really solid golf and going on tour. And then my whole first year of touring, I think I was like 10-15 rated, up to about 10-18 rated. And it was a little bit of just like, settling into what tour kind of style of golf was. And then this past year, I just put my nose to the grindstone and putt every day, hours on end. And that's what's really gotten me to that 10-20 level. And
is that, I mentioned earlier probably, but you spent some time in Arizona this offseason. What did that look like? Because it seems like that paid dividends. You started out pretty hot on the tour and you've stayed hot.
Yeah, so It worked out really well for me. I've got some family down in Arizona, and they housed me for a couple months. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, it was just it was a great time. I got to hang out with them. It's a good experience there. And then just every day I was working out, putting, going playing around, doing some field work, putting some more, and like day in, day out. And by the time I got to the tour, I was really confident in my game. Took me a minute, like LVC, took me a minute to settle in and like just see how my game relates in that setting of the top tier. I think one of the things at LVC is I was more confident in my putt than I was actually capable of. So I was like running 50-foot death putts, being like, oh, I've been making these, and then it wasn't working out quite as well. So I had to like settle in and really figure out where my game stacked up. And then ever since then, I've been playing some pretty solid golf. Staying consistent, making more putts than I did last year. And
yeah, that's awesome. So one thing you said really early on in this conversation was, hey, you had the skill, which was the distance for you. Do you think it could be true if somebody would say, hey, like they've got the putts, but they don't have the drives quite as well? Do you think that like each player levels up in their own way with what they're naturally good at and what they work on? Or do you think, no, the power is the typical thing that separates that separates out the top pros?
So it's interesting you say that. One thing I've kind of come to terms with lately is the fact that you can make up for putting poorly with driving better, but you can't make up for driving better by putting better. Driving poorly by putting better. If that makes sense. So it was especially apparent at like Blue Lake, where there were a lot of players that just putt so well. Like they didn't miss any putts, circle 1 or circle 2, and yet they're still shooting over par or not super great. And that comes down to the fact that you have to give yourself those opportunities. So I would say that driving and upshots are a little bit more important because I've had tournaments where I didn't make any putts and I still won the tournament because I can just put my drives closer to the basket. That being said, I think that putting is the easier skill to really pick up. You just got to put your nose to the grindstone and you got to practice. And it's a pretty easy skill to just, everyone asks like, how are you so good at putting? Like Corey Ellis, one of the best putters. I think he had the best stats all year last year. And everyone's like, oh, what's your secret for putting better? And he's like, I practice every single day. Like there's no secret to it. It is just doing it. It's just practicing it. That being said, the distance and the driving is a little bit different. There are different, techniques, different skills, different things you have to learn in order to build your distance to get the shots. And it is practice as well, but I think a lot of it's different. It's harder to build. So I've always kind of had that idea of I love driving. It's my favorite part of the game, and I put a ton of work into it. And so that's why I got good at that to begin with. And I think that is what I would recommend for people to start with, because the putting is something that you can just put the time in and make happen.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. It's interesting because you talk to, we generally have either a pro on or more often like a pro give us a pro tip, and you'll see that it probably depends on their style of play and what they're good at and what worked for them, but you'll see some say like, hey, nothing matters but putting. Mm-hmm. And then you'll have somebody say, like, nothing matters but upshots. And now you're coming on saying, hey, like, what really matters is to get the drives. And I think that there's probably a certain level to which the thing that you love or the thing you struggle with is the thing you're going to emphasize at some level. But as the courses get longer and the tee shots get more and more brutal and there's more OB, I imagine that what you're saying is going to be increasingly true, which is it doesn't really matter what you do on the green if you can't get there. So it's super interesting as AMs and following the sport. It's just different perspectives, but also how maybe the sport is changing over time and emphasizing different things.
That's one thing that I realized going to Ogden and playing Ogden for the first time. That was the first probably pro course that I've ever played. I realized how vastly different it is compared to the courses we play here in the Valley. And not only the distance that you need, but the control you need with your drives is unreal, of which I don't have. And it almost bummed me out and sobering me and realizing that I have a long way to go as far as where I would like to try to get. I mean, I don't expect myself to be a pro, but I'd like to continue to improve my game. But it also was exciting in a way of like, these are some things that I can work on. And so, yeah.
Yeah, it's a little bit different perspective. I guess I didn't say this quite in the right way, but a lot of people play par 3 courses, par 3 tournaments, and things like that. And in that case, I would say putting is the most important aspect to that, because I've seen, you just every hole is 300 feet, somewhere around that range. If you can get yourself within 50 feet of every basket, which is pretty doable on those courses, if you're making all your 50-footers, you're going to shoot 18 down. So there is different styles of play. I was definitely more talking about the tour style.
The pro tour, if you don't have the distance, that's, yeah.
Well, I was just telling David's brother John that at Delta, he was saying, like, he hasn't been working on his long game much and doesn't feel till. And I was like, look, if you make your putts, you're going to win. Like, it doesn't really matter what you do, because if you can just halfway get towards the basket, you're going to have a putt, because most of the court holes are between 190 and 300 feet. So, yeah, that makes total sense that the Pro Tour requires more of the players off the drive, which, yeah, they can elevate the baskets and they can make the baskets, in an awkward spot. But in general, putting is going to probably be about the same regardless of where you play, excluding wind. But Tour versus AM level tournaments are C tiers. So that makes total sense.
Yeah, and being able to make the difference between, I'm sure a lot of the players on tour are having to play, when you don't have the distance, you're having to play the hole for a par. Well, if you have the distance like you and some of the top players, then you're able to attack that as that's a birdie that I expect to get. And so having that just difference of attacking the hole that's such an advantage.
Yeah, it's definitely a different way of playing. There's a lot of holes where I'll step up to it and I'll be like, I don't think it's it's my best play to go for this. I think I'll probably bogey it more times than I'll birdie it if I'm going for this, really tough shot. But then I think to myself, like, if I lay up on this hole, I'm never birdieing it, and I'm still going to bogey it like a fair amount. So a lot of the times I'll go for shots simply because I'm bad at laying up. I'm not the kind of guy that likes playing for par. And like you're saying, that's back to the, you throw a good drive, good up shot, make a good putt, you get your birdie. Versus I'm much more of I'd like to throw an amazing drive and then let the rest of those things be easy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that makes total sense. We've talked before on the podcast about it takes a certain level of confidence to lay up. And people don't realize that. They think it's the easy way out, but it's not, because that means, hey, you laid up on your drive, now you've got to have a good up shot and a good putt. And for me, a lot of times it's like, I don't have to think about all that. I'm just going to go for it. Even though as an AM, it may be like a 40% chance of birdie and maybe worse, a 20% chance of birdie and 50% bogey, 30% par, where if I laid up, in theory, it should be 50-50 or whatever. I don't know. Apparently bad at numbers today. But in any case, it does take a certain level of confidence and gall. I think about Drew Gibson at Las Vegas Challenge when he laid up on the final hole, and that was like a pretty tight green or a pretty tight fairway in terms of distance to lay up, and then lay up again and make your 25 footer to win. And it showed to me, a level of confidence that I think naturally when you're watching, you'd think it's a conservative play. It doesn't require a lot of confidence. And I think it does.
Yeah, that's a great example, actually. I'm glad you brought that one up. I was thinking about Drew on that hole, and if it were me, that's not a shot I would ever throw. 100%, I would be going for that 100%. Simply because the fact that I execute the shot, I win.
Yeah.
And secondly, that I am not super confident in the layup. Another good example of that is hole 1 at DDO, the first course.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know what I'm talking about. 300 feet, island hole. And a bunch of people laid up. And I knew going in that if I got a 3 on the hole every single round, that was going to be my best solution, right? That would be best case scenario for me. But I stepped up to that hole. There's a little bit of wind, and I'm like, if I lay up and then I miss the upshot, I get a 5 instead of a 4. So I went for it every single round, not because I thought I could get the 2, but because I could get a 4 every single time if I went for it. And it was just that confidence of, I don't feel confident laying up and then executing that second shot, and I'd rather just have the small chance of getting the 2 and take the 4. To me, that was my layup.
Nice.
Yeah, that's so interesting to hear. Sorry, David, what were you saying?
I love that you bring that up, because I feel like I equate kind of the style of play. It's similar to baseball in the sense that as hitters coming up into the league, you have to know who you are. If you're a hitter coming up and you're a contact hitter, if you're a power hitter, whatever type of hitter you are, if you're a contact hitter and you're going up and trying to hit home runs every time, you're going to be terrible. There's one of my one of the players I've been following on my favorite team, the Mariners, young guy, has been coming up trying to hit bombs every time, and he has the power to do it, but he has incredible contact skills, and he's forfeiting the contact skills, which is taking away from his game entirely. He's forgetting who he is. And knowing who you are in anything across the board, but in a professional sport, you have to know who you are, know what you're good at, and do it. And I love that you hammered on that.
Yeah, I like the idea of following your confidence as well.
Yeah.
Like, hey, I'm not going to put myself into a situation where I'm doubting my decision. I'm going to make my decision, and I'm going to live with it. And maybe in 2 years, you make the opposite decision because your game feels different and your skills are different. But, I mean, that makes total sense, and I think it's something that so often we sometimes think we're making the smart play, but because our skills or our brain is hesitant, that play actually hurts us more than making the aggressive play. So that's really fun to hear. I really appreciate that. You guys want to hop into a disc review?
Let's do it.
All right, we've got the What Was That disc review. This week, we have the Discraft Raptor. It's a 9-speed, 4-glide, 0-turn, and 3-fade fairway driver, control driver, utility disc. Aaron will tell us which one is the appropriate term. I'll start, or let David start. I'll hop in, and then Aaron will give us the definitive answer here. But, David, what did you think about the Raptor?
I loved it, man. Definitely, I throw Firebirds a lot in my bag, Aaron. I've talked about it multiple times on the podcast. I bag a Sexton Firebird and also a flat top Firebird. This I was telling Josiah, it kind of fits in between that for me. It's not as straight as the Sexton Firebird for me. It kind of hyzers out a little bit earlier. But if I lost my Sexton Firebird, I feel like this would replace it just fine if I couldn't get a hold of one. Very predictable. I mean, you can throw it straight for a bit, and it's going to have that hard crash at the end. And very predictable. I mean, I'm throwing on the forehand mostly. I messed around with a little bit on the backhand. I still don't throw Firebirds super well on the backhand. Okay, I think they're better with the spike hyzer with it. But I like it, man. Great disc. Definitely reminds me of the Firebird. And, of course, I'm very much in love with the Firebird.
Yeah. Well, hand David a flat top overstable disc, and he's going to find some love for it. I like the Raptor, too. We threw ESP, and it was a nice flat one. And I think that the feel was fantastic. I felt like it felt really comfortable both backhand and forehand. I hadn't messed with Raptors before. A lot of times you just end up picking a disc for a slot and you just throw that disc. And so it was pretty fun to try. I had a little different experience than you, David, and I think it could be partially just because our games are different, but I thought it had maybe a hair more glide than I expected. It still was a very controllable disc, but it felt like you could beat it into something that would be more than a utility or crazy overstable disc. I liked it a lot. I threw a lot of little flex forehands with it. Parked hole 10 in the short position or the medium position at Watson. Made it through double Mandos on a little flex forehand. Gave myself a 20-footer. So,
dude, that's awesome.
Yeah, nobody on the listening to the podcast understands that hole, but Aaron and David do. So we'll go with it. But yeah, it felt really good. I was very tempted by it. I own some Firebirds and some Scepters, and
you own a lot of Firebirds.
I own a lot of Firebirds. If anybody's looking for 2011, there is no 2011 Firebird. If anybody's or Sexton Firebird, if anybody's looking for 2021 sexy birds, hit me up. I'll sell you one at a good deal. I have too many of them, but I really liked it. I think it's a very nice disc. I was pleasantly surprised because I felt like I expected it to be a meat hook from how flat it is. And it was overstable and nicely, but I felt like it was controllable even at an AM, like 350 power, both forehand and backhand. I felt like a really useful disc. Aaron, what I hear is you hate the Raptor.
Yeah, not exactly. The Raptor is one of the 4 discs that I'm throwing right now. I've got other discs in my bag, but I was analyzing my game the other day, and I really only throw 4 discs. I throw a Zone, I throw a Raptor, I throw a Force, and I throw a Nuke. And pretty much I'm using the Raptor for every fairway to shorter distance driver shot. I've got 4 of them in the bag right now. I've got a Z Raptor, I've got a Paul Ulibarri Tour Series Raptor, I've got a Ledgestone Raptor, it's a Tour Series, and then I've got a Captain's Raptor.
And is that the stability range from least stable to most stable there?
Actually, there's one more, which I should probably put in the bag, which is the ESP Raptor. I think is even one step less stable than the Z Raptor.
Okay, so we were probably throwing, it was fresh, but probably on the less stable side. Okay. That's cool.
Yeah, it's probably good for that. For you guys at that arm speed, it gets you a little bit more glide and stuff like that. I'm throwing the Raptor for all my straight shots, a little bit of like backhand turnover lines, forehand flexes a little bit. But for forehand, I'm probably throwing it anywhere from 300 feet up to like 370, somewhere in that range. And then backhand, I'm throwing it like hyzers. I throw it about 300, some spike hyzers, all the way up to about 450.
Okay, wow, that's cool. And when you're throwing this 450, what angle are you throwing it on?
Yeah, so this Paul Ulibarri Raptor I have has a ton of glide. It's very straight. Usually it's because I'm trying to hit a gap, something like that. So I'm snapping it nice and flat, hard as I can throw pretty much. It's turning just a little bit and then fading back. And so it goes up to 450. 450 is kind of like really pushing it.
Yeah, no, that's cool. That's the difference between AM and Pro Power for sure. I was like 300 feet. I was like, oh yeah, I pumped that one. What did you slot in the bag before you were sponsored by Discraft? Was it a Raptor or did you throw something else?
So I had a few things in the bag. I didn't have too much Discraft in the bag before I was sponsored, but I mainly threw. I had a Sexton Firebird and I had a FD3.
Yeah, I love the FD3.
Yeah,
I mean, RIP. Innova made Discmania originals, but for sure. So with the Sexy Bird, what year was that?
I think it was a 17.
Okay. So a little bit more of a neutral one in theory, I guess.
Yeah, and it was way beat in. So it was almost like Thunderbird styles of.
Yeah, I think the most recent years are pretty close. David was saying that the Thunderbird and the Sexy Bird are basically the same. The 2021 Sexy Bird are basically the same disc for him.
Yeah, I was messing around I was throwing a flex line on, oh man, I forget which hole it is. I think it's like hole 9 at Delta. It's just the tunnel one. It's 300 feet. It's the teeny gap going up, and so I'm throwing a flex for it, and I landed the Thunderbird and Sexton Firebird in the exact same spot on that flex. So
yeah, I would say that this mold across every brand is probably one of the most popular discs. I think the Raptor is amazing. I think anyone on Prodigy, I think it's the FX2.
Right.
I was talking to Thomas Gilbert. He says he's got 8 of them in his bag. It's just like his number one thrown disc. Obviously, Sexton Firebird. FD3s are thrown a lot for Discmania players, so it's just a really good utility disc, very reliable, very overstable. You know what you're getting out of it.
Yeah. No, I think it's a really fun disc, and it's fun to try a different brand of a similar disc. I've tried the FD3, Firebird, Scepter, which is basically a Firebird. It's Innova made as well, and the Raptor. But I think this ESP, I think if I had started with something very overstable for my game, I would have been like, yeah, okay, it's overstable. But the CSP definitely opened my eyes to be like, oh, that could be more useful to me than the occasional like flex forehand or like really crazy windy day disc. So I liked it a lot.
One of the things I really liked about the Raptor is they came out with the Captain's Raptor this past year, which is a different mold that is basically one step more stable, one step less glide. And my favorite thing about it is that finding stable Raptors, finding stable in anything, just like crazy stable, reliable, is tough. And they were just like, hey, we know it's tough. Here, we're just going to make this disc. And every single one of them is just that like really, really overstable Raptor. You know exactly what you're getting out of it. I've got one of those, the team stamp in the bag right now. It's getting just a little bit beat in, so it's getting a little more glide. But I love the fact that I've got like 4 more of these in the car. And then right out of the, like, I know exactly how they're going to fly. They're going to be that very overstable flex forehand kind of shot.
Yeah, that's awesome. If you've got a mold that you love, having that one that you know what it's going to be to kind of cap that off as you're kind of cycling through is awesome. What's the feel like? Is it pretty similar between the Captains and the Raptor? Do you notice, or in the regular Raptor, do you notice any difference?
Yeah, there is just a little bit of difference. You can tell that, I don't know, the rim feels just a little different. You can tell that the Raptor has a little bit more glide than the Captain's Raptor. I know when I'm throwing them hard, I'm just not getting the same distance out of the Captain's Raptor. But other than that, they feel really good in the hand. It's kind of my ideal rim width for throwing a disc hard. So,
yeah, no, that's awesome. It's cool, you know, like you're saying, hey, I throw 4 discs basically. And I think that so often we try to decide, I vacillate personally. I think AMs and pros alike, either like, oh, I've got 17 molds in the bag, or I've got, you know, like the Philo Brathaways of the world have 5 molds in the bag, and that's just what they roll with. And so it's just cool. You know, you always imagine that a specific disc is going to totally change your game. But if you develop all the skills, then you really can rely on a few molds and know them well and trust them well, and then kind of rotate through as they wear to have consistent lineups in your bag. So that's cool.
Yeah, and when I say I only throw those discs, I will say that the range of Raptors I have in my bag range from like Vulture all the way to like Machete.
Yeah.
So like it is a lot of different discs that I could just have those slotted in, but I've just beat the Raptors into that specific spot, so I know exactly how they all fly. It is a wide range of shots.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. But that's what you enjoy, is like having the same mold and having the same feel, it seems like. So
Definitely.
that's cool for sure. Well, we'll get into our rating. Our rating system is we will take our scores 1 to 5 and then sum them to 10 normally. We got Aaron on, so we're going to count David and my scores as half. And I'll have to do some math in my head, and we'll see how it goes. But our rating system is 1, it's just not that great of a disc. 2 is it's an okay disc, but there's better options out there. 3 is it's a good disc, but it just doesn't stand out. 4 is it's fantastic, but it's not going to make the bag. And 5 is it's going in the bag. So, David, I'll start with you. What's your rating, man?
I'm going with a 4, and I think, that's partially because I have a huge bias on the Firebird because that's what I've relied on for so long. But again, like I said, if I couldn't get a hold of a Firebird, this easily I would grab it and feel very confident in going into a round with it.
Yeah. I'm going to go 4 as well. I would go 4.5 because I'm very tempted. And I think I can sell some Sexy Birds and make this work, but it's a lot of effort to do that. And I would go 4.5, but the math is going to be tough later. So I'm just going to give it a clean 4. I liked it a lot. I really enjoyed throwing it. I really enjoyed this ESP, just how it felt like controllable at my arm speed. And I like the idea, like you're saying, Aaron, that there's all the levels more stable than that. So you could really build out a full, even control driver lineup just with one disc once you beat them in. So definitely a good disc. What about you, Aaron?
So obviously I'm going 5 there. It's in the bag. It's one of my staples for sure. And I will throw this back at you. One of the things I noticed when I had like an open bag is I had some Cloud Breakers. I had some like first run Doombirds, some Sexton Firebirds, and I was scared to throw them a lot at the time. So like you step up to that water shot and you're like, I need my best disc, the one that I trust the most. And you're like, oh, it's a Sexton Firebird. I'm throwing $100 into the water if I miss this. And that's one of the things, it's kind of a good thing and a bad thing, is that Discraft just has those discs that fly like that, like right from the factory. And so it's so nice to just step up to that and you're like, I know how this disc flies. I don't care if I lose it. I can just grab another one. And so it just gives me more confidence when I can step up to those water shots.
You're spot on. I literally just tossed a Firebird that's beaten in my bag just so I can have it in the tournament at Delta and throw it confidently over the water so I don't have to lose my Sexton Firebird and be in a weird mood the rest of the round because I lost it.
It's funny because I was just talking to Ryan Wilking about this last episode. So if the 21 Sexton Firebirds ever go up way in value, then you'll probably see, or 1010 discs will see an order for like 10 Raptors come in, because I think it will be, all right, okay, I guess I'm going to buy some base plastic for that slot. And this this slot usually gets beat up pretty good. So you're abusing a very expensive disc a lot of times. Big thanks to 1010 Disc for sponsoring this disc review. You can use the code THEGRIND5 to get 5% off your order. Well, so summing our scores to 10 became a lot easier. I'd say 9 out of 10, so a great score for a fantastic disc. And we're almost done with the podcast, but I wanted to ask you, just for fun, what's your favorite card you've had this season so far?
Favorite card? All right. So favorite card this year. This one's an interesting one. I've played with a lot of the top guys, and a lot of them are really fun to play with. My favorite card this year was actually at the Portland Open, just because it was a surprise. Second round, I got to play with Ben Calloway, Nate Metzler, and Nick Hansen. And Ben Calloway's a great guy. It was fun. It was the first round I've ever played with him, and he's a good guy. But the highlight of it was the fact that I've been battling with Nick Hansen and Nate Metzler since I was like 15 years old in Colorado, right at that like 980, 990 mark. Ever since I was a kid, all the time. And it was just such a cool experience to be like touring Portland Open. We're nowhere near Colorado, and we just got the 3 guys together again for another round.
Yeah, that's fun. Like a family reunion on the road or something.
Yeah, exactly.
That's awesome.
That's super rad.
Well, Aaron, we really appreciate you coming on the show. I know one way people can support you is ordering a bag from Upper Park and use the code Aaron10. Upper Park is actually sending us a bag to demo out and check out. So we're going to be lining up some bag reviews, and we'll mention that code again when that comes up. Is there any other way that people can support you and follow you as you tour?
Yeah, I really appreciate you guys shouting that out. That is the number one way, just that correlates straight to me. It's big on social media. If you guys want to follow me on Instagram, it's Aaron Gossage Disc Golf. So that'll help out a ton. And then hopefully I'll have some fundraiser discs coming out, some tour series stuff, that kind of thing in the future. And I'll definitely let you guys know on other ways to support me on the road. Yeah,
we'll definitely keep in touch, and we'll find a way to put it through on the podcast and Instagram as well. Well, thanks so much for joining the show. And have a heck of a tournament at, I guess you have, what's it called, GoPro Games?
Yeah, the GoPro Mountain Games. I'm really looking forward to that one.
And then Bailey with Match Play. I'm super pumped to watch you play. So thanks again for coming on. And for everybody, including Aaron, whether it's coffee or disc golf, don't forget to enjoy the grind.